The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome. This is a presentation all about using Medicaid community budgeting and helping individuals transition out of the nursing home. My name is Suzanne de Beaumont, and I run the Open Doors Transition Center. And we have, for this webinar, we have Kellyanne Murray from ICANN and NYAIL. And she is extremely knowledgeable, and I know this is an issue that transition specialists have been facing kind of on an ongoing basis. So we have a really jam-packed webinar here, and everyone should have received a copy of the PowerPoint already. If you did not, there should be one available on your on the GoToWebinar menu. In addition to having the PowerPoint on the menu, you should also see a box for questions where you can type in a question. And if you would prefer to ask your question out loud and you do have a microphone, you can use the raise your hand feature, and then I will let you know when I've unmuted you so that you can ask your question. So without further ado, I'll say thank you, Kellyanne, and jump right in.
Sure. So hello, everybody. Just so I can explain a little bit about ICANN and NYAIL. ICANN is the Independent Consumer Advocacy Network. It is the ombudsman for individuals who are enrolled in managed long-term care, home care through Medicaid. It's made up of community-based organizations throughout New York State. So whenever I have to say who I work for, it's about 20 words. So I work for the New York Legal Assistance Group, which is a legal services program agency. My program within NYAIL is the Evelyn Frank Legal Resources Program, which is the program that provides assistance for individuals who have Medicaid, Medicare, or home care issues. So that's who I am, and that's who I work for. A lot of people have questions about what all those words are on the first screen. So I'm really excited that in an hour I'm going to make you all Medicaid budgeting experts, and then I'll be able to call you for some help. Next slide. So today's agenda, we're just going to go through strategies for nursing home residents to deal with your NAMI, your net available income. We're going to look at chronic care budgeting for people who are in a nursing home. I know that most of you are experts on that, but I just want a quick review of that. And then go through community budgeting and how it's different. We'll go through spousal impoverishment and spousal refusal. And then we're going to go through discharge from the nursing home with budget options, because I know everyone's goal is to get home, into the home and into the community. Next. Okay. So just so you know, this presentation has been geared towards the Medicaid category for disabled, aged, and blind individuals, aged meaning anyone over the age of 65. They use usually SSI budgeting, and they follow the SSI rules in regards to that. We're not going to be focusing in on the MAGI category, which is usually the category for all individuals who have Medicaid, who don't have Medicare, or who are under the age of 65. If you have MAGI questions at the end, you'll have my email and my phone number. You can certainly give me a call, but most of the individuals that we're going to be looking at are members of the disabled, aged, and blind category. Next. So community Medicaid pays up to 29 days, which means that if an individual is going into rehab or a nursing home, the first 29 days, if they've already been deemed eligible for Medicaid, community Medicaid will be paid for. So when an individual applies for Medicaid, you have community Medicaid, then you have community Medicaid with long-term services, and then you have nursing home or chronic care budgeting Medicaid. The first two categories of Medicaid pay for 29 days. After that, the person's Medicaid case would have to be converted to chronic care or nursing home Medicaid, or they would have to apply for a nursing home or chronic care budgeting. That does require a 5-year look back, in that your local Department of Social Services or HRA are going to be looking for any transfers of assets that are large that looks like you're trying to hide your money from Medicaid. Once the 5-year look back has gone through and individuals have been deemed eligible for Medicaid, we'll go over that in a few minutes, how Medicaid will pay. 29 days is important because Medicare, if you're in a rehab, pays for 100 days. So Medicaid would be your secondary coverage to Medicaid. But what happens on day 30, the community Medicaid is no longer covering it. Just a side note, anyone who has the Medicare Savings Program for QMB, which is the lowest level, less than $900 a month in income, they have protections for balance up to the 100 days, regardless of this 5-year look back. We can go back. We can, next slide. Sorry. So what happens when the person reaches day 30? They are presumed to be permanently placed, which means that you have been put into this facility and you're not leaving. It's presumed. In the olden days, anyone who went into a nursing home never left. It's no longer what's happening now. However, your regulations have not been updated. So I've given you the site for the actual regulations. And so when a person goes up to after day 30, they're going to follow this. They're going to look at a permanent absence status, which means that the individual is not expected to return home unless there is adequate medical evidence. It will be presumed that the individual will not return home if the person enters a skilled nursing facility or an intermediate care facility, or if the person has been admitted to acute care and is then transferred to an alternative level, or if the person has no community and remains in a acute hospital for more than 6 calendar months. Adequate evidence, medical evidence may overcome the presumption. So that's what's really important. I know that it's focusing in on you've been permanently placed, but the person isn't really permanently placed. So how do we make sure that your local Department of Social Services or HRA knows that when they do the Medicaid budget, it's not going to be budgeted as chronic care? Next slide. So there's 2 stages of budgeting. As I said, we've got stage 1, which is community budgeting. So if a person gets up to day 30, what happens is their stay will continue to be budgeted and paid for through community budgeting for the first month of the conversion or the application. Once that month is over, they will switch over to your chronic care budgeting. So what that means is which income guideline is going to be used. So you'll use community budgeting, so a single person is $842 plus $20, which is $862. Or for a couple, it's $1233 or $1253 with the $20 disregard. You always count in any health insurance premiums will be deducted from your gross income. What happens is once you've gone on to the next month, the first of the following month, it will flip to chronic care budgeting, which means you've been presumed to be permanently placed in that facility, and therefore there's no reason for you to need any additional money other than the personal needs allowance of $50. That's called your NAMI, or your net available monthly income. And in addition to chronic care budgeting with the $50, there is your option for spousal impoverishment budgeting for individuals who are legally married to one another, which I'll go through in a little bit. Next slide. If I am talking too fast, please let me know. I got the New York City speed of talking, and if I start to lose anyone, you have to let me know, or I'm just going to keep going. So chronic care budgeting in the nursing home, as I said, once again, you're going to be sick of hearing this, that it presumes that somebody has been permanently placed in the facility and there's no need for additional income. You can rebut the presumption, and it can be overcome by adequate medical evidence that the resident can return home. Once they're permanently placed, you've got chronic care budgeting. If a person had community budgeting and then gets admitted into the hospital and they do not, into the facility, and they do not rebut the presumption that they're permanently placed, they can no longer use the community pool trust, which I'm going to go through later on, to offset the expenses. Next slide. So what is community budgeting? Community budgeting, so we're going to look at Morgan here, which is a single person. Their income is $1,500. You would look at their budget. They've got a monthly Part B premium. Most of everyone's premium is now $134. A few are a little less. If they have a Medigap policy, or they can continue to pay for that premium and use that deductible. If they don't already have that Medicare supplement or the Medigap policy, just on a side note, if they are on Medicaid, they cannot purchase one. Everybody gets $20. Why $20? I don't know. And then so you would add up the individual's income, and you would subtract all your health insurance premiums along with the disregard. Your net Medicaid income is $1,068. As you can see, Medicaid does not care about any living expenses whatsoever. They will look at the Medicaid income guideline based on a household of 1 or 2, and then they will subtract that guideline, and they will come up with the net available monthly income. While on community budgeting, the individual will be will get to keep $862. They'll pay their health insurance premiums, and then the $226 will be considered to be a spend down, with the idea of that money would be going to the facility if the individual doesn't have a pool trust. The income does increase when they're married to 1233. Next slide. So chronic care budgeting. So we've got Morgan. He's here. They're here again. They're in the facility. The same $1,500. The same $134. The same $278. I forgot the $20 disregard. I apologize. It's really $1068. You would subtract $50. That's a personal needs allowance. As I've said, it's presumed that you're permanently placed. You're not leaving. Since you're not leaving, there's no reason for you to need additional money. Therefore, the individual gets to keep $50, and the net available monthly income is $1038. It's really $1018. I apologize. Oh, no, it's not. No, I'm correct. Sorry, the slide is correct. I apologize for that. The NAMI will go to the nursing facility. So in this case, $1038 will go to whatever facility they're in, and then Medicaid pays the rest. So in Medicaid contracts with any facility, they have a negotiated rate that they pay that facility. They would pay that amount minus the NAMI to each of the facilities. And that would apply for the first full month after the conversion or the new application has been put in for chronic care budgeting.
So Kellyanne, is there no $20 Medicaid disregard?
I believe there's no $20. You know what? I'm going to clarify that, and I'll send an email to you, Suzanne. I apologize for that. I don't believe that there is a $20 disregard, but I have to read the regulations.
So the person is responsible for paying $1,038 to the nursing home.
Correct, correct. If this slide is not correct, you will get an email immediately.
Okay.
Well, within the next hour,
Okay.
once this is over. Sorry about that. Once again, married couples can use spousal impoverishment. Okay, so I know you all were on this call because you want to know how you overcome this presumption. So it has to have adequate medical evidence that the resident is expected to go home. It does not need to be guaranteed. So the conversation would be with the doctor, so-and-so wants to go home. We believe that the individual will can get home. He or she can direct his own care or can appoint someone else to direct the care. And so our expectation is that they will be going home. In New York City, they have a form. The form is created by New York City HRA. It's so-and-so expects to go home. The expected time for he or she to go home is within the next 6 months. That date is put in there. The client has the following medical conditions, and then the doctor signs under an attestation that the information on this form is correct, and they're certifying that the resident can go home. That in New York City is able to.
Doctor, is that what I'm understanding you say? So the transition specialist would provide information to the doctor, such as we have a lease for this individual, they have an apartment to go home to, we plan to, get services through the MLTC plan. Like that's what.
Correct. Or you'd be working with the social worker in the facility. It depends. Usually the social workers who's helping people who actually discharge. Some facility social workers have different roles. So it would be whoever you would be working with for the actual discharge.
Okay.
That is
what we usually
the issue is that it has to be medical evidence to rebut the presumption that they're permanently placed. So that's why you would have to have the doctor on board to sign the form.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right. So what will happen there is once the form is completed, it would go to the nursing home's financial department or the Medicaid office, however they labeled, who actually assists individuals with the Medicaid transition and conversion, saying, hey, this person is, yes, I understand they're here. If they're here for more than the 30th day, if Medicare was paying, if Medicare wasn't paying, it would be on day one. We understand, but he or she wants to go home, he or she can go home, and we need you to submit this to the Medicaid, the local Department of Social Services or HRA. Now the concern is going to be, but we need to get paid. And if we continue on community Medicaid, we won't get paid. And that goes back to community Medicaid will only pay up to day 29. So you have to inform or educate or stress to the facility. I understand what you're saying. You're still going to get paid. This is just something internal that Medicaid does. They will be in the category of chronic care or nursing home Medicaid. They just budget the case differently with the understanding that now this resident can keep up to $862. So the facility gets paid, the individual can still keep $862 in their pocket, and Medicaid will pay the facility as if they were full Medicaid. So how do you do that? On the conversions, you want to make sure that on Supplement A form, so when a person goes into Medicaid, if the person's in the disabled age or blind category, they're in a paper, usually paper application. They have a regular Medicaid application, and then they have a Supplemental A form. Supplemental A form, there is a question that says, do you intend to go home? Make sure that the answer is yes, if they intend to go home. In addition, with the application, you want to make sure that the doctor's statement goes in regards to the medical evidence or certifying that the individual is going to go home with an expected date of 6 months. And I would have a written statement from the patient or the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, whoever's directing the care, stating so-and-so is, the plan is for so-and-so to go home, and we are requesting that the budget be continued under nursing home budgeting, but with community budgeting or income guideline. If anybody wants to see what New York City's forms look like, the Evelyn Frank Legal Resources Program has an article in regards to this, and the forms that New York City uses are posted there. you can try using that form without the New York City logo and everything. So just use it as a template to see if that will be successful. I have heard that it was successful in Suffolk County yesterday or earlier today. We just happened to have had a case that we worked with you all on in Suffolk, so it works. Some counties don't mind you actually using New York City's map form. Other counties prefer not to see something with HRA's logo on it. It's just, this has already been determined that it can rebut the presumption, and the wording can rebut the presumption, so that is why we're using it as a template. Next slide. So on the form, I said that it can be up to 6 months. If the individual is not out in 6 months, that's okay. You can renew it for another 6 months. There is no, oh, well, your time has lapsed, you're now permanently placed. There can be no expectation of discharge. It can be renewed. All it would need to do is another statement from the doctor letting them know that has changed and that it would happen within the next 6 months. In fact, Department of Health, New York State Department of Health did clarify this, that there is not a 6 month duration, and they debunked it on it under question 2. So here's the link if you want to see them actually question it. If not, if you go to the New York State Department of Health's website, it's within one of those questions. So as I said, just because they are permanently placed does not mean that the patient does not have the option to be discharged home. So if it is a safe discharge home, meaning the resident and or they have someone who can direct their care home, then the person is not enrolled into a managed long-term care plan. So what happens is, in some areas in New York State, if you're a nursing home resident, you may have been mandated to enroll into a managed long-term care plan. If you're in a county that did not mandate you to go into a managed long-term care plan and you weren't in it before, what you would need to do is these following steps. If the person is in a facility and wants to go home and needs home care. If they have Medicaid, you request a conflict-free evaluation from New York State, or if they don't have managed long-term care, you can go through immediate need home care with the county with medical documentation and an attestation that there is an immediate need. That will go through. You would request, if the person did not have community budgeting already under chronic care, then you would request to the community that the individual does have the intent to go home. You would have the doctor sign the paperwork that needs to be signed, the certification, the attestation. You would go down to the nursing home finance department or the Medicaid office and say, hey, this person's going home. We would like you to request from the local Department of Social Services or HRA for the case to be budgeted as community budget using the income guideline of community budgeting for this individual's household so that they can go home, so that the money, the 862 is now available for them to start paying if they did not already have it. If the person was not in the managed long-term care plan or as of yet, after the state has come in and said, yes, you need home care, yes, you need it for more than 120 days, yes, you need it for more than 8 hours a week, then what will happen is you've got state approval, you've got the Medicaid, and now you can have a plan come in and do an evaluation. Plans are required to come into the nursing home to do an evaluation, so don't have that be the reason that stops them. They are required. If for some reason they refuse to, then you would want to contact the New York State Department of Health's managed long-term care complaint line to say so-and-so is not cooperating. The state says that they are eligible to enroll, and now the plan will come to do the assessment. Then the plan will come in, do the assessment, and when you want the care plan to, you want to receive a copy of the care plan with the number of hours. You can have more than one plan come in. It's kind of unfortunately like buying a car. You want to go with the best deal, whoever gives you the most hours. Next slide. Okay, so you've got the individual, they're in the facility, they're ready to go home. You've got home care all set up, and now all of a sudden the person's like, they're telling me I have a spend down, they're telling me I have too much money, my income's too high, I can't give them all my money as the spend down, I need more than $862, what am I going to do? So I'm just going to go through some of your budget options. Is everybody okay with the permanently placement and getting community budgeting options? I'll give you a few seconds to ask questions or raise your hand. If you think of anything as I move on from what I've already discussed, just stop me.
So going back to this slide quickly, I'll just ask a question to make sure everybody's on the same page. So when the person comes into the nursing home, and most of the time the transition specialist doesn't get involved until after that 30 days has already passed, and it is highly likely that they're already being considered permanently placed. So what we should be doing is, starting the transition planning process, and once we've got the MLTC enrolled, going back to that same process where we have whether it's New York City and you're using their form, but if it's in the rest of the state, doing something similar where the doctor is indicating that the person is not permanently placed.
Yes, so that's what you're going to be doing. You're rebutting the presumption that the person is permanently placed.
Right.
Just because in September of 2017, the person was deemed permanently placed, they changed their mind in June of 2018 is okay. They're allowed to do that. At which time, you're going to rebut the presumption that the person is permanently placed. The person wants to go home. Let's go home. Here's the intent to go home. You have the doctor that says, okay, yeah, they're ready to go. They can go home. Everybody agrees that it would be a safe discharge whenever that discharge would be. Then let's get them onto community budgeting with you rebut the presumption.
And
just on a side, so I'm sorry, what?
I believe when people are using the Olmstead housing subsidy, that the Olmstead housing subsidy asks for a letter from the doctor indicating just that the person's able to return to the community. So we might be able to use the letter that Olmstead is already getting for us. Correct.
That would be good. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that letter. Does that have an expected or anticipated discharge date on that?
I don't know. I can look them up, but it definitely says, these are the conditions that the person's living with or whatever, and then it says that they're able to receive services that they need in the community. And actually, it might have a time frame on it. I'm not sure.
Okay. So then that should be enough evidence to rebut the presumption that they're permanently placed. The issue is if they don't agree, if the local Department of Social Services and HRA does not agree with you, the only avenue you have to get the budget changed to that would be through a fair hearing.
Okay.
You could try a conference with the local Department of Social Services. They might tell you we need something else, but it should be okay.
Okay.
Okay, so what does a person who's in a community, what are their budget options when all of a sudden they find out they have too much money or too much income? We all know it's not really too much, but on paper to Medicaid, it's considered to be too high. We've got spousal impoverishment and spousal refusal. Now, those are available when the person's in the nursing home, but in this section, I'm going to talk you through it in the community because people forget about spousal impoverishment as an option for people who are getting managed long-term care or immediate need home care. We're going to go through the housing expenses that when we get that in our office, we do a little dance because we're really excited that we're able to use that for individuals who unfortunately were in a facility and Medicaid did pay, but now we get to get them home with not having to struggle as much with a large spend down. Then I'll quickly review pooled income trusts if we get to that, and the Medicaid buy-in program for working people with disabilities. Note, that's only good for people under the age of 65. Next slide. So spousal impoverishment. So what is spousal impoverishment? It is a type of budgeting that Medicaid allows in which, and the goal is to make sure that the non-Medicaid spouse is not left in poverty because the Medicaid spouse's income needs to be used to pay for Medicaid. It used to only be for individuals in the nursing home. However, it has expanded to individuals who are on 1915 waiver participants, such as your traumatic brain injury and your nursing home transition diversion waiver. It also is MLTC enrollees and immediate need. With immediate need, it's supposed to be done on exactly our application for immediate need. You're not even supposed to have to wait until the home care is in place.
So say that again. You can.
So when you do an immediate need application,
mm-hmm.
so we've in New York City, because that's where my cases are usually from. We were having issues with the immediate need going in and them telling us that the spend down was really, really high because they did not give you the spousal impoverishment. But under the guidance and the administrative directive, it is supposed to be done at exactly the application for immediate need. You don't have to wait till the home care is put in place.
Okay. And because there's immediate need, what we've found is that sometimes it's not all that immediate because they can't find enough aides. So it can take some time.
Right. So the budget for spousal impoverishment would be done at the time in which they say, yes, the person can be authorized for home care.
Yes. Okay. Got it.
That's when the budget should be done. So spousal impoverishment, so it's only available when one spouse needs Medicaid or is in a nursing home, is in a nursing home or needs home care. It allows the couple to keep income up to $31.40 if they're in if the individual's in the nursing home, and $34.81 if the person is in the getting home care at home. That's what I don't know what the subgroup means. After deducting the Medicare Part B and Medicare Medigap premiums, it also allows them to get higher assets. So usually it's the standard's $15,150 for a couple. It's $22,200 for. The spouse it's supposed to read $22,200. I'm sorry. For a couple, in this case, a spouse can keep up to $74,000, and then the individual. Oh, that's why. I apologize. I totally confused myself. The applicant, the Medicaid recipient, can keep $15,150, and then the non-Medicaid spouse can keep up to $74,820. So combined, they're allowed to have $89,970 as opposed to the $22,000. Once again, it's immediate need application when home care is authorized, and it's also available after the individual has actually been enrolled in the MLTC plan. So if the person's going from no MLTC to an MLTC without doing immediate need, they are not entitled to this expanded income and assets until the actual MLTC enrollment is complete. Next slide. So when you're going through spousal impoverishment, there's different categories of incomes. So you've got your community spouse monthly income allowance. You also have your family member allowance, and then you have a personal needs allowance. So what's the community spouse? So in this case, we've got Chris and Morgan. Chris is going to be your community spouse or your non-Medicaid spouse. Morgan's going to be your MLTC spouse. We're going to go through what the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance is, which for the community spouse or Chris here is $3,090. And then you have a community spouse monthly income allowance, which is the amount that Morgan or the MLTC spouse can on paper hand over to Chris and will not be counted within his spend down amount. And then you've got a personal needs allowance, which is the amount that the MLTC recipient, that should be recipient, oh, I'm so sorry, is allowed to keep, which is $391. So I'm going to update these slides so that it reads correctly, and I'll resend them to Suzanne, who can resend it out. I apologize for that.
Just so everybody hears this, I will send it out to everyone who signed up for this webinar, so you'll get a second copy of the PowerPoint.
I apologize for that. Okay, next slide. I kind of talked you through all that, so we're going to go to the next slide so we can actually get into an example, because usually that's the best way to fully understand my babbling about all these different allowances. So we've got Morgan and Chris, they're married. Morgan receives Social Security disability, and Chris gets Social Security retirement, and they both have Medicare. So Morgan gets $2,000 a month, Chris gets $1,500 a month, and since they're both getting Medicare, they're paying the $134 each of a premium. So if you're going to just look at the budget, your first thing is to look at their income. Chris has income of $2,000. You look at minus any Medicare premium. So Chris's net Medicaid income would be $1,866, and Chris's net Medicaid income would be $1,366. Next slide. So what you want to do is you want to determine what would be the best way for this couple to go. We're going to go with the community spouse and determining what actually Chris would be allowed to hand over. Chris would be allowed to keep. So Chris's income, as I said, was $1,500. You subtracted $134. His net income would be $1,366. Well, Chris is allowed to get money from Morgan. So we have to determine how much money Chris is allowed to receive from Morgan. So we look at the monthly minimum maintenance needs allowance, which is what has been set by regulation of $3,090. You would subtract, in this case, Chris's net income or the community spouse's net income, and you would come up with what the amount of money that Morgan or the Medicaid spouse could, on paper, hand over to the community spouse or Chris. In this case, it'd be $1,724. Next slide. Next slide. So now you're going to apply it. So now we're going to look at Morgan. Morgan has $1,866. That's his net income. That was his $2,000 minus the $134. We got up to his net income at $866. Morgan on paper is allowed to keep $391. That is the personal needs allowance set by regulation. So the money left over would be $1,475. Now, if we remember on the slide before, we looked at what was the maximum amount of the community spouse monthly income allowance that Chris could receive, and it was $1,724. But in this case, Morgan only has $1,475 on paper. So Morgan is allowed to transfer that over to Chris, and then there would be no excess income or spend down whatsoever. They would be able to keep their entire monthly income with no money going to the managed long-term care plan or the home health agency if you're in an immediate need. Next slide. So we're going to look at budgeting based on a single person. And why I'm saying this is we're going to change up the facts. Let's say Morgan's income was $3,500 and Chris's income was $1,500. Actually, we're going to switch that around. Sorry about that. Chris's income is $3,500 and Morgan's is $1,500. I have to switch that also. I'm sorry. So Morgan's net income, Chris's net income would be $3,500. You subtract the $135, the net income is $3,366. If you were to look at the community spouse monthly income, we know that the maximum amount that the community spouse would be $3,090. Well, in this case, Chris cannot get any money from Morgan because Chris's money is too, Chris's income is too high. Next slide. However, if you were to look at, there's an administrative directive out there that says, so Administrative Directive GIS 12 MA 013, it says individuals with the community spouse must have eligibility determined under spousal impoverishment budgeting with post-eligibility roles unless it is more advantageous to budget only the waivers participant total net Medicaid income and compare it to the Medicaid income level of 1. So in both of this, so when you have a community spouse that has a large amount of money or a large amount of income, it may be beneficial to the individual or the Medicaid recipient to only be budgeted as a household of 1. Next slide. So they can use this budgeting when, based on an equation where the personal needs allowance allowed for under spousal impoverishment, which is $391, plus the community spouse monthly income allowance is less than the actual Medicaid income guideline for a household of 1. Then it would be more favorable. And this comes into play when there's spousal refusal. Why it's beneficial to households is when a person does spousal refusal, the county can still go over this, after the spouse for support. However, if they fit into this category, they're able to be household of 1. They won't be held accountable. The community spouse will not have to do any support, and then none of that money would have to go over to either the Medicaid office or to the spend down.
So
So
what I understand you to be saying is that essentially you can do the math 2 different ways, and
correct.
What the rule is that whichever one works out better for the person is what's supposed to be picked. But who does the math 2 different ways? Like, is the Medicaid office going to automatically do that, or is that something that we have to ask for?
Yes. So the Medicaid office is required to do all the different types of budgetings and use the budget that is most advantageous for the recipient or the applicant.
Okay, so it's not something that we have to actively ask for.
We actively ask for it because we usually find the household of 1 budget under that GIS is not used as often as we would like.
Okay.
So we try to
if we
get them to the right answer.
And it seems like it's lower than it's worth asking TSS to rerun it as a household of 1 or a single person?
If it's more advantageous to them, definitely.
Okay.
Next slide. So let's take, if we were to do a budget based on just Morgan's income, you would have $1,500 minus $134 minus 20, which is the disregard. His net Medicaid income is $1,346. He has a Medicaid standard of $842. So his excess income would be $1,504. his excess income would be $504. So if you think back to where Chris had $3,500, if you were looking at all of that, the spend down would have been a lot higher when you combine their incomes. So that's why it's more advantageous for Morgan to be budgeted as a household of one. So if a person did not have spousal impoverishment budgeting before or was not in an MLTC plan and they get out, they once enrolled in the MLTC, it is not automatic. They have to actively ask for this type of budgeting. So if you do immediate need, all of that advantageous budgeting should have been done all at that time. However, if they did not and were not in an MLTC plan before, they would need to ask for this budgeting once enrolled. Some counties prefer that the request comes through the MLTC plan. HRA is one of those counties, one of those boroughs, one of those, I guess, county is correct. What happens is the Department of Health has a very simple form that gets completed that says, please look at community spouse income, community spouse allowance, or personal need, or family allowance. It's a one-page format, and the information for that can be found at this link on page 9. In New York City, we have an additional form that goes with it. Spousal refusal, as I touched upon, a spouse has the right to say, I am unable and unwilling to provide any financial support for my spouse's medical care on an annual basis. This is usually on the chopping block when it comes to the governor's budget. However, we are on our 29th attempt to repeal this statute, and it is continuing again through 2018. There's a form or a letter that can be sent in with the application that says I am unable and unwilling to provide my income, unable and willing to provide my assets, unwilling, unable to provide income and assets. New York City, once again, has a form. I did an application for somebody in Nassau County a couple of weeks ago, and they actually use New York City's form also. The form, it's two forms. It's a form that the applicant signs that says my spouse is unable, and then it's a form that the spouse signs that says I am unable and unwilling to provide my financial assistance for my spouse's medical care. The downside is the county can sue. Some counties have been seeing it happening. A rule of thumb, we're under the impression, and this is just the impression, that if the person did do a spousal refusal, the county would not be going after them if they would also fall within the spousal impoverishment numbers. And if they fall within that number, the county is not suing them for support while the person is still on the Medicaid roll.
Why would somebody do a spousal refusal if they can fall within spousal impoverishment?
Okay, so what happens is the couple I actually did in Nassau County, what happened is the husband has very high assets, has a $50,000, has a high bank account. Mm-hmm. Wife's name is no longer on that bank account. But so if you were to look at the application as a household of 2, they would not be asset eligible. So plus, if you look at the income amount, when you first originally budget the case, the spend down will be really, really high, which makes people nervous. Mm-hmm. So by putting it through with a spousal refusal, we were able to say, here, so on paper, the person is eligible for Medicaid with no spend down and is not above the assets, so doesn't have to spend down assets. As soon as they're enrolled into the managed long-term care plan, you ask for spousal spousal impoverishment budgeting, and then the concern about being sued for support is gone.
Okay.
On paper, sometimes it's not supposed to be happening, but especially if you do an immediate need for some reason, home health agencies are not, do not want to accept cases that a person has a high spend down on. So that's why you would also do the spousal refusal. So once again, here would be Morgan's Medicaid budget with a spousal refusal. Next. So housing expenses. This is a special income standard. It's only available after the person has been discharged from the nursing home or adult home in which Medicaid has made payment for. If you're married, you have to choose which budgeting is more to your advantage. So once again, you would have to run the numbers. If the spousal allowance is better, then that's what you would want to choose. Next slide. So the requirements is that there's a nursing home stay or an adult home stay, nursing home for at least 30 days prior to the day of discharge. Adult home could be any day stay prior to the discharge. Medicaid has paid for it, and the individual must have a housing expense. Here are the 2018 housing allowances, depending on which region you live in, would depend on what disregard you would get. So in my example, I have Morgan and Chris living in, I have Morgan living in Albany. What would happen is if Morgan was a single individual, his income was $2,000. He had a monthly premium of $134, the income disregard of $20. He would be allowed that housing allowance of $467. So his net countable income is $1,379. Therefore, his Medicaid excess income would be $537. I don't know why I changed Morgan to $2,000, but it was if Morgan like previously had $1,500, his spend down would only be $137. It's when you apply, or if you're switching off of chronic care budgeting, you would make your request at that time for the housing allowance, and you would include copies of the rental agreement to show that the individual is going to be paying rent and is paying rent going forward.
Is it just
that housing allowance?
Can it be something like a lot rent, or for a trailer, or when you have a homeowner's expense for a condo?
Yes, it has to be any housing expense.
But it can't be taxes if you own your own home?
No. Oh, I don't know. I'll double check.
Yeah, what I've been told is it can't be taxes if you own your own home. That those are the only folks that really can't get a housing allowance. But if you have like condo fees or something like that, that would work.
I will reread the regulations and I'll answer your question of what is a housing expense.
All right, and we have a question here. I had a consumer come home from a nursing home and is being enrolled into an MLTC plan. Her husband recently needs to enroll in an MLTC plan as well, and the local DSS says she needs to budget for them both in the community. This is wrong, right? They should be budgeted under a household of two?
Yeah, in the community, so they'll do community, they're both in an MLTC? I'm sorry.
He's going to enroll, so both of them are going to be enrolled in an MLTC, yes.
So there'll be community budgeting with a household of two.
Yes.
Yes. They do not have to enroll in the same MLTC plan if they do not want to.
Right. But they would be under a household of two. Yes.
Yeah, so I don't know in that scenario if the person has spousal impoverishment before, or why they're in the community together, so they're a household of two.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The issue is when one person's in a nursing home and one's getting home care, then they're both budgeted as a household of one.
Okay.
So I've been talking about people with spend downs or excess income. So the excess income is based on the income guideline that cannot be changed. So when you have somebody yelling at you that they don't have excess income, make sure that they understand that you understand they don't. It's just what it's worded. So individuals who are disabled have the option of enrolling into what they call a supplemental needs trust, which is a trust that individuals over the age of 65 need to use a pool trust through a third party. So if we're looking at the scenario where somebody has income of $1,500 a month, they pay their health insurance premiums. This person has a Medicaid policy plus the disregard. They have a net countable income of $1,168. They have an income guideline of $842. In this case, the person would have a spend down of $326. And we probably have all had the conversation with, well, I need all my money because I can't pay my bills unless I do pay it. How am I going to give someone $326 for my Medicaid? So what you're going to do is you would talk to the people about a pool trust or get them to somebody who can. You just have to keep clicking through. So before the pool trust, if you were looking at the actual scenario, you just hit next slide. So the client had $1,500. They have an $800 rent. Keep going. Con Ed or your electric company, you've got $50 for phone. You've got $200 for, you have to pay your health insurance, and you've got $88. When you add it all up, you see my $1,500 in, my $1,500 out. How in the world can I give Medicaid or the home health agency or managed long-term care plan my $326? So after the person puts into a pool trust, and once again, a pool trust is just a legal mechanism. The person takes their money, they deposit their excess income into the trust, or they can deposit more. When the budget is done, any money that is deposited into the pool trust after the people have been determined disabled, what will happen is it decreases your net Medicaid income. So in this case, if the person has $1,500, they decide that they're going to put $825 into the trust. $800 of that would pay the rent. You've got your electric bill, you've got your phone bill, you've got your food, you've got your health insurance, and you've got other. So in this case, the expenses are only $1,366. One, because if you notice, health insurance is cheaper. Because you're putting the money into the trust, the individual will be eligible for the Medicare Savings Program because you're below the guidelines of that particular program. And the Medicare Savings Program will provide assistance for the Medicare premium. So now the person not only is able to use $800 to pay their rent that was put into the trust, they'll also gain $134 out of the deal, and they will not have a spend down. Therefore, the spend down is zero. And we get very excited when we're able to do that for someone. So once again, the perk was for the spend down. So
that just says what you just said.
Yep. So this is what the budget would look like. So you got $1,500. The health insurance premiums changed a little. You've got your unearned disregard. You've got your contribution to your pool trust of $825. Therefore, your net income is now only $477 in Medicaid counting, and you're below the income guidelines, so therefore no spend down. We like to tell everybody it's your legal way of hiding money from the government. And if you need more information about the trust, we have some articles, and here are the links on the Western New York Law Center's website. So I know that I've probably given you more information that you need. I'm just going to quickly go through the Medicaid buy-in program for people with disability. It's for individuals who are under the age of 65. If they've been deemed disabled or can show a disability and meet the criteria, and they are able to have some kind of job. It can be a small job. It could be walking a dog. It could be opening somebody's mail. It could be watering plants. If they have somebody who's willing to write a letter that states that they work for them, they receive X amount of dollars in cash on a monthly basis, then they would be able to have a higher income guideline and a higher asset guideline. It's for anyone. When you count income, earned income, it's not counted dollar for dollar. So here's the computation of how you would count that money. Next slide. So you take whatever the earned income is, you minus any related work expenses, just subtract $65 and you half of the remainder, and that's what's counted. For those people, what's good about that, if you're under 65 in this program, you do not have to put any of your retirement accounts into payout status. Next. And the job does not have to have taxable income. You do not have to be paying taxes. You do not have to have a tax return or a W-2 from that. So we have heard fair hearing decisions in which the judges have determined that to be true, and that is not true based on all of the regulations, and we're slowly but surely trying to correct that matter. So it could be any job. It could be, as I said, getting $25 to water plants or to walk a dog. So in this case, if Morgan got a job for $185 a month, you would first determine his unearned income, then his countable income, and then you would apply the Medicaid buy-in program standard for it too. And in this scenario, his net unearned income would be $32.38. Keep going. Next slide. His earned income would be $185 minus 65 divided by 2, which would be 60. Next slide. So if you look at it, you've got $32.38 plus 60. Their net income would be $32.98, and therefore they're below the Medicaid buy-in program for working people with disabilities. And that is if Morgan is under the age of 65. And that's another dance we perform. So this is my contact information. As I said, I'm going to review the question about the $20 disregard for nursing home, what is a housing expense in regards to if they're allowed for the housing allowance. I'm going to correct that one slide in regards to the personal needs allowance, and I'll update and send all of that information to Suzanne.
Okay. And I will send it out to everyone.
And I'm sure everyone's head is swimming.
Yes.
Because my head swims when I do this, and I do it regularly. So if you look through the slides once it's come out and you have any questions whatsoever, please just contact me, send me an email, give me a call, say I was on the webinar and I have some questions, or I have a client, what do you think of this? I'll be glad to run numbers for you. I'll be glad to answer any of the questions that you may have.
Okay.
Just remember to try to rebut the presumption with medical evidence, and you should be able to get the community budgeting of 862.
Yes, and I'll also let the transition specialist know that Kellyanne had written basically a summary of what it is exactly we need to say to the nursing home and send to the nursing home. And I'm going to copy and paste that into a Word document and put it in the TS resources section. So you'll have something kind of pre-made, ready-made, and that already worked for someone in Long Island. So we'll keep using the same thing that works, I figure.
And if you run into any problems with it, just let me know so that we can reach out to other agencies if they have or anyone on our listservs to see how else you could rebut the presumption. We don't usually get questions about that, or we're not made aware of the problem. So if it's a continual problem, then we know we need to focus on it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This was a lot of information and very useful, and I'm sure we'll be able to be better able to get people on community budgeting and using the MLTC housing allowance. I know we've been trying to do that quite a bit lately. But thank you very, very much for your time.
Well, my pleasure.
This will be on the NYAIL website, available to listen if you need to listen again to some of this.